Our next speaker has over a decade of experience in Edelman. He's a specialist in corporate positioning and reputation management, something Shiv just touched upon. And he's worked with some of the world's largest and some of the world's most complex organizations. His expertise includes crisis communications, mergers and acquisitions, and IPOs. Today, our speaker will touch upon brands and the trust we have in brands. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and let's welcome Matt Harrington, the Global Chief Operating Officer of Edelman. Matt.
Good afternoon, everyone. Very pleased to be here in Goa and grateful to Praxis for extending an invitation for me to spend some time with you this afternoon. Needless to say, is my mic on? No? I'm multiple mic'd, but it's not working. All good? Can you hear me? Yes? Great. So, thank you. I'm grateful to Praxis for including me. And as I was saying, I'm in particular very pleased that trust is the focus of this conversation today and tomorrow. Edelman has been studying the state of trust for the last 20 years. And in particular, we've been looking at the state of trust as it relates to government, business, NGOs, and media. But today, I wanted to take a little different direction, as we've done some recent work around the state of trust in brands. And when we talk about trust in the context of any of these entities, it's the degree to which you and I believe a brand or an institution will do the right thing. So it's very much a future-facing sort of situation. Trust in terms of brands has always been very essential. After all, brand is a promise that consumers need to know that they can trust a brand to deliver both on product as well as from the way in which it incorporates in our lives and in society. And brands are still expected to provide that reliable product while ensuring a positive customer experience. But something's been changing very much over the last several years, and that's our own expectation of how brands also engage in society and what they do for the world at large. And that, I think, is very much a function of the challenges that the world is experiencing and how brands need to participate in responding to some of those challenges. So I think the key question for us at the moment is, do consumers trust brands to do the right thing? And as it relates to both not just their products and their communities, but also the societal impact. This heightened expectation for brands to do the right thing has created three gates, if you will, that brands need to clear to earn customer trust. Brands have always had to earn the trust as it relates to delivering a great product experience. In the US, by example here, we've had the Good Housekeeping seal of approval for over 100 years, confirming that the product is going to deliver as advertised. In the internet era, the customer experience has become a new competitive advantage for brands. Brands now are asking consumers for personal data, their credit card, and the promise of free, hassle-free online returns. So it's a much more intimate relationship. And then there's a third gate for brands' trust, and that is, to what degree is brand engaging in societal issues and cultural challenges, as evidenced here with this Nike campaign of the last couple of years. Consumers told us in our work that brand trust is becoming more important in the brands they buy because brands are now playing a larger role in both consumers' lives and in society. More than 6 in 10 say it is more important that they can trust brands for product-oriented reasons, such as innovation, and innovation, brand experience, increasing reliance on brands that are automating our lives as we all prepare for the autonomous vehicle. 67% have growing concerns about their customer experience. The concern about loss of protection around data, brands that can track and target me as a user. All of that is of serious concern. But they increasingly, and at 77%, it's greater than these other two areas of interest, are really focused on the degree to which a brand is engaging in society, in community. And the concerns play into addressing fake news and information concerns, as well as a desire that a brand mirror back my own set of values. We heard the last speakers talk about trusting a person like me. People have trust for a brand that reflects the values they represent. Brands are also making bigger promises in this context. And while consumers' need to trust brands is on the rise, brands are making some pretty big promises, whether it's ensuring that electric cars are on the road, lowering overall emissions than those that were dependent upon gas, to ensuring that you're going to have a safe, clean experience in a stranger's apartment, or as represented here on the far right, Walmart's most recent statement and business decision with regard to gun safety in the US. Brands are making bigger promises, but can consumers trust them to do what is right? I think the answer to this question is critical for all of us as public relations practitioners, since our research shows today that brand trust is essential to buying. And we increasingly need to be a partner with our clients in helping them deliver product and fulfill promise, and therefore gain trust in the marketplace. In fact, trust now ranks with product, brand, and company attributes as an essential buying consideration. Only quality, value, convenience, and ingredients rank higher as a deal breaker or a deciding factor in a brand buying decision. 81% of those we surveyed say that it is critical, and this is on a global basis, that they can trust the brand to do what is right, making trust even more important than reviews or reputation. And that number is even higher here in India, where it's 85%, looking at that level of trust desire. Brand trust is seen as essential by consumers across markets, age groups, demographics, gender, and income levels. And it's rated as important buying consideration in 8 of the 10 markets that we've studied here. Note that even in markets where brand trust ranks lower than the global average, it is still ranked as a top buying consideration, coming in at number 6 in Japan and France, where there is a lower degree of trust across the board. And only 1 in 3 can trust most of the brands that they buy. And I think here is really the big missed opportunity for brands. When we ask them how many of the brands they buy can they actually trust, only 1 in 3 consumers said they can trust most of the brands they buy or use. That's a pretty shocking, large shortfall when you think about the fact that consumers want to be trusting brands, but that trust isn't there. And I think it's particularly interesting in India, where there's a high expectation of trust in brand, and businesses are trusted more than government, and yet it just isn't the trust that we would see. So there's real opportunity, I think, in this instance. Where our data reveals an enormous opportunity is consumers that buy without trust are less passionate. That's pretty logical. But when they do buy with trust, they're twice as likely to be the first to buy a new product being introduced by a company. So their loyalty will carry forward. They also are twice as likely to be an advocate and, importantly, to defend a brand at a time of crisis. So those passionate advocates can be defenders of brand. And without trust, brands are leaving enormous opportunity and, I think, leverageable KPIs on the table. A further exploration of the findings reveals that when it comes to earning trust, there is a significant untapped opportunity for brands that can find a way to convince consumers they're taking action in a way that truly makes a difference. Consumers today have high expectations for brands. More than 1 in 2 agrees that every brand should get involved in at least one issue that directly impacts its business. But when we ask consumers if they have personal knowledge or experience of brands that do the right thing for society, only 1 in 5 could say that they had experienced that. So they're unconvinced that brands are truly committed to societal action, which I think for all of us as storytellers for our clients represents an untapped vein that we can connect for our clients with their customers and consumers. With only 34% in India believing companies keep the best interests of society in mind, this is particularly low given that new requirements that expect companies to spend a percentage of their revenue on corporate social action and activity. And so I think that again is a disconnect that's happening here, where companies are required to give, but consumers are saying they don't really feel it, see it, or know it. Making a promise, as in that instance, is no longer enough. More than half of the consumers that we talk to agree that too many brands are increasingly using societal issues as a marketing ploy to sell more products, seeing these types of campaigns as a form of trust washing that may actually damage trust rather than earn trust. And increasingly, brands are finding that packaging or campaigns alone are not enough to convince companies that their brand can be trusted to do what is right or have the positive impact on society. And a couple of examples here I think that are noteworthy. McDonald's for International Women's Day turned their M upside down to call attention to International Women's Day, but that was it. Marks and Spencer in the UK packaged sandwiches in the rainbow to bring attention to diversity, but no commitment on the part of the company beyond that. So it was very much about a sales target and tactic. And then I think Audi launched a campaign that was promoting equal pay for women and was very positively received initially. And then it came out that of the executive leadership team at Audi of 12, only 2 were women. And so there was not a sort of putting your money where your mouth is as it relates to this kind of work or campaign, or a commitment stated as such to do so accordingly. There's a declining faith in brands as a result. And the data shows a decline in people's conviction that brands are truly having an impact. There was a 4 and a 5-point drop in agreement that brands are more creative and can have more impact in addressing societal problems than government, and a 6-point drop in people's faith that brands will heed their call to action. So this is not going in the direction that we need to go if we're going to foster brand trust. And again, as I called out earlier, in a world where our trust barometer indicates business is more trusted than government, this slide says that people think in India, government's more likely to help engage in solving societal problems than business. So it's again, that disconnect that both is concerning and I think represents opportunity. When we asked folks to describe a brand they have trusted for a long time, we asked them to describe the reasons why. What was underlying their trust in that brand? And we found that brands are broadly trusted via product considerations. So 87% trust that the product is going to deliver on the promise. 69% say that trust is based on customer considerations, that the brand is thinking about the customer. And then 51% trust that the brand is thinking of social considerations. So it's not nearly at the level of where it can or should be in terms of the 3 gates that we see. The rewards multiply when brands earn consumers' full trust. The trust to do right, not only for products and customers, but for society as well. Brands that have passed through these three gates of trust find that the majority of its consumers, 68% on a global basis, will buy that brand more frequently, stay loyal to it, particularly in the face of disruption, advocate for it, and defend it against critics. So, what are the steps as brand marketers and communicators that we can take to earn and maintain the full trust of today's consumers? How can brands avoid disappointing the consumer? And particularly, the challenge is, I think, in light of the fact that consumers are avoiding advertising. The notion, therefore, of earned creative, social by design, what we all inherently believe passionately in, is crucial in a world where 1 in 4 consumers now actively avoid advertising. A 10-point increase in just the last year of people who are using ad blocking technology, changing the ways they consume media, streaming service, et cetera, all in an effort to avoid ads altogether. And this is where I think India in particular is a fascinating market from the standpoint that the newspaper culture remains extraordinarily strong, and therefore our opportunity to tell stories in an earned context remains great in a world where advertising on a global basis is collapsing as a powerful channel tool. There are numerous benefits to investing in building brand trust. When your brand is trusted, consumers are more likely to pay attention to your advertising and other communications. So if you're a trusted brand, your suite of communication channels work harder for you. Among those who were describing a relationship with a brand that they trusted for a long time, 3 in 4 said that they actually paid more attention to the brand's marketing. Hence, back to that statement I made earlier that they're more inclined to engage with a new product from a brand that they trust. And this compares to only 1 in 2 who do so for a brand that they don't fully trust. Trusted brands also act on their words. They make promises with real actions that are backed up to the promise. Brands must do as well as say. Whether the action is a contribution to support a cause, such as Lifebuoy's Help a Child Reach 5 hand washing program, or Dove's Men Care, where they offered financial support for men to take a paternity leave, or the final example here, where Google has really made an initiative to bridge the digital divide in rural India. It's these kinds of actions that brands are serious about making a difference and therefore fostering trust. They also have the added benefit of getting people talking, that there's more earned coverage, peer conversations, and the brands, again, can amplify across channels. Rather than being talked at, people also want to be talked with. They want to engage with people who are relatable, again, a person like themselves, less than someone who is popular or a celebrity. This has been borne out over the last several years of our studies. Conversations are more credible than advertising, and influencers are more trusted than brands. 63% agree that they trust what influencers say about brands more than what brands say about themselves. As authentic, trusted voices, influencers have a lot of impact. 58% of the young adults that we surveyed for an online influencer poll said they'd bought a new product as a result of listening to an influencer. And influencers earn trust at 40% and advocacy at 33%. Those peer voices and conversation starters also turn out to be the most effective way to earn trust in a brand message. We asked respondents to our mobile survey to tell us if they'd seen the same brand message previously, and if so, where, and then analyzed which combination of exposures across different platforms resulted in the highest likelihood that the brand's messages were trusted. It turns out that 4 of the 5 first exposures were peer-related. So they were picking it up through various channels with peer conversation that were then amplified by owned, social, paid, as secondary sort of channels that really help drive awareness and frequency of understanding of a brand's mission. Once your message has broken through, the repetition of that message across multiple channels builds and strengthens trust, as we see here in the message. The more places people see the brand message previously, the higher their trust in that message, which goes back to the old data point that we have from the trust barometer, that people need to hear something 4 or 5 times to latch onto it and to believe it. It's that trust and verify piece that we also just heard about. Once an individual has seen a message repeated across 3 channels or more, not only did overall trust grow, trust also became stronger, with more respondents rating their trust in that message at the top of the scale. And I think that's because consumers know that brands have the power to affect real change. They will trust brands that demonstrate that they can make that change happen. Brand trust is essential to buying consideration and ranking nearly high as product, brand, and company attributes as decisive for brand consideration. They want to be able to trust brands to do what is right with their product, for customers, and for society. And they expect brands to keep their promises by taking action that makes a real difference. And when brands have earned that trust, the rewards are great. As an industry, I'm confident about PR's key role in helping brands and business build resilient trust, especially needed at this time of change and uncertainty. And over the course of the 30 hours of this summit, I'm certain that we'll explore what trust can be and the opportunity that lies ahead if we all do great work going forward. So thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
Okay, thank you everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. It's great to see so many familiar faces. Given everything we see around the world, there seems to be such a breakdown of trust in institutions. And I think, as you pointed out, that poses some real opportunities and challenges for business. But I wanted to start with this because this is a question that I often see and I often face when we're talking about brands taking societal action, taking on social issues, which is one of the things you talked about as being critical in terms of bridging that trust gap. So if we talk about brands tackling social issues, and whether we describe it as brand activism or not, why is that not corporate philanthropy or CSR?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the old term of corporate philanthropy, that was check writing. And it was often check writing for what was either the CEO's pet projects or what was viewed as societally beneficial from a cultural perspective. I think what we've seen in the last several years is a pivot towards trying to address some of the genuine issues and chasm that exists between the haves and the have-nots, or some of the real societal tensions that are existing that create challenges for us in communities, but also as businesses in trying to operate in a particular environment. I think of Mark Benioff in San Francisco as an example where Salesforce has made a considerable effort and commitment around homelessness, both because it's a personal passion of the CEO, but it also is a reality that all Salesforce San Francisco employees live with.
I'm glad you brought that up because I wanted to ask you about that, and I will in a little bit. So real action on issues is what you're describing, but that potentially creates another gap, does it not? Where a company is advocating for certain issues, maybe taking action on them externally, but hasn't always considered its own behavior and its own policies in certain similar areas. You talked about this with McDonald's, for example.
Or Audi.
And Audi. We saw with State Street and Fearless Girl. I mean, that was a company that was facing a Department of Justice investigation because it was alleged they were paying men more than women. Why do brands keep getting this wrong?
So this is where I would say all of us have a responsibility as communicators to both, I think, help companies, our employers or our clients to engage in issues that matter, but also go in eyes wide open. So if you're going to engage in an issue as important as gender equality, understand what your own house, how in order your own house is. And I don't think that that means waiting until your house is totally in order,
Right.
but rather engage and say, and this is the work we have ourselves to do. And I find that the companies that find themselves up against difficult moments where they haven't done the internal pressure testing and really haven't done a full vetting, and this is happening, it is remarkable how often it happens across all sectors and industries. The fashion industry in China being perhaps one of the most recent examples. You know, no one is serving as a devil's advocate in thinking through how a product introduction might go or be perceived in a particular culture.
So the industry as devil's advocate rather than just devils, which is, I think, progress.
I think of us as advocates, but I think we can work both sides.
How do companies decide which issues they're going to tackle? You talked about Mark Benioff at Salesforce. Is it always the CEO's passions? Because sometimes that might create a disconnect with what actually matters to a company's business.
Yeah, so I think it's great when a CEO has a passion around a particular issue that matters. It shouldn't probably advance into the organization unless it also relates to the company's own values and mission. And so I think that any company that begins to engage in these issues should be thinking about what is the impact to its own employee population, how are the community constituents going to think about the company's engagement. It needs to be authentic. If it's perceived as being knee-jerk reaction or because they feel pressure, it doesn't make sense. I think Michael Corbett, the CEO of Citigroup, made a decision around, this was several sad cycles back around some of the gun issues we have in America, that Citi would no longer finance companies in the weapons manufacturing industry.
Right.
And that was a business decision around a societal problem. And that seemed very genuine and authentic and true to their values. And I thought, he was getting a lot of heat for it, and the presumption was Citi's share price would take a hit, and the exact opposite happened. And I heard that people were actually opening accounts at Citi because they appreciated the stand that was taken.
Interesting. And you talked about the importance of employees, and I'm curious to hear your views on how significant they have become to this whole equation, because if we take a company like Google, for example, it's spent the last 2 or 3 years kind of at war internally between one group of employees who want the company to behave one way and another who want it to behave another way. So it's clear we're seeing employee activism as a driver, but how do companies weigh the considerations of competing groups of employees?
Right. So it's a very fraught environment, I think, now more than ever, and the employer-employee contract is changing and shifting pretty dramatically. I think the millennial workforce has a different expectation out of their employer than previous generations. There are a few things I think have come for a number of companies in the tech space that have had some walkouts, is that there's been a lack of immediate communication with the employee workforce about contracts, about why and what business they're in. Because I also think it's an instance where employees you can't run a company through the entire tens of thousands of individuals coalescing around a particular idea or opportunity, because you've got a business to run. But you can explain the decision process and why a particular contract has been taken, and why, if you don't take that contract, what are the consequences maybe for the customer or society at large. So I think that there's more transparency and engagement that's required between management and the workforce, and that's something that I think a number of companies are sort of coming to terms with now.
It raises the possibility, or the reality maybe, that there's a cost to taking on these kinds of issues, right? So there may be a cost in terms of your workforce, who may decide this isn't the place for them. There may be a cost in terms of profit, right? So if you are J&J and you decide that you're going to prioritize getting asbestos out of your talcum powder, that will ultimately hurt your bottom line. Is that a case you're having to make to your clients? That at some point, if they're serious about taking a stand on social issues, they're going to have to accept that it may come at a financial cost?
It's all part of the calculus, and I think it would be irresponsible of us not to point out the pros and cons, the benefits and the costs to any situation. The premise in this environment of a win-win is pretty challenging, but if you have values, mission, purpose, and you have checked your gating system around your decision against those, and are making an informed decision to do the right thing, I think you want to be on the right side of history in the long haul.
Do you think companies are becoming more comfortable with the idea that, let's say, purpose comes at a cost, and sometimes at a cost in terms of profit?
Well, I don't know about comfortable. I think maybe understanding and running the sort of balance of what is that cost going to be. I think that the CEOs of the Business Roundtable who made that announcement in August about a realignment of the purpose of the corporation to not solely be about profit, but to also be about multiple stakeholders and a more holistic view, is a recognition of a shift in the role of business in society, and that I think in making that change, they recognize that there are costs, and there are going to be winning and losing, and they're no longer going to be just graded on share performance and return on.
And how different is it for a new company that comes along? Say, let's take an example like Patagonia, for example, an American company that, its mission is to help save the planet. It donates its tax break to environmental causes. It refuses to engage in Black Friday and instead donates the profits it makes on that day to...
And is very serious about its sourcing,
right,
among other things.
And its sourcing. I mean, is it just easier for newer companies compared to legacy players when it comes to these kinds of decisions around building a company that is actually taking action on social issues?
It's easier if you're starting with a blank page. I think Patagonia is fascinating because I don't know quite how old they are, but I think they're 40 plus years old.
Oh, so they're not that new.
Because their founders were sort of, I read a New Yorker profile of them that, sort of the hippie generation, and they just had stuck to it, and they built their brand, and they are held up as the paragon of a company of purpose. But I think some of the disruptor brands in the marketplace these days, whether in the food sector or consumer product goods, they are leading with purpose. They're saying we're only going to buy organic cotton for clothing. We're not going to be part of fast fashion. We have a different perspective, and I think for a host of emerging consumers, that's incredibly positive.
Sure. So I was at another event in Manila earlier this week, and actually it was a session on brand activism. And one of the things I observed is that there is a reluctance, I think, still for companies in this region. I don't think so much in India, but I do think in Asia in general, to take a stand on issues. They would rather appear neutral and say less, not stick their heads above the parapet. Is neutrality an option? Is silence an option? Or is that just as controversial now as actually taking a stand on issues?
Well, from my vantage point, I think it's just as controversial and fraught with problems. And I also think that the sophistication of consumers now is pretty global. I think that the reality that we're all living mobile phone lives means that the engagement with brands is pretty consistent across the globe, and I think that the emerging generation of consumers have a pretty common expectation around what they want out of brands that they engage with. So I think companies need to come around to engage.
Right. And I mean, one of the points you've been making at Edelman for many years now is that CEOs have to lead on this. And yet, you'd be hard pressed to find that many CEOs, certainly if you look at Asia as a whole, who are well known to the person on the street. I mean, do you see that dial shifting at all?
I mean, it's interesting. 2 years ago with the Trust Barometer, we name-checked a host of CEOs on a global basis. And for all the awareness that this room may have about a host of CEOs' names, both in India and globally, there was very low recognition. I think Tim Cook, Jeff Bezos, Jack Ma were the three that were mentioned most, and then everybody just dropped enormously.
Okay. Do you see rising, I mean, from the research and also anecdotally from your own experience, do you see rising cynicism about, let's call it woke washing, or companies that are using purpose as a way to signal their virtues without taking actual action?
I don't know that I see more. I see brands misstepping, as the examples that I gave, where I characterize it as trust washing. But I do think that brands have continued to surprisingly stumble in trying to, as you characterize it, woke washing, showing they're engaged or hip to a particular customer interest or base. I do think the Nike example, which has been much talked about, the Travis Kaepernick marketing campaign, which was billed as a marketing campaign to foster a conversation about race issues in America, played out just as they strategically planned. And all of the naysayers and the investment community that dropped the share price in the first 48 hours of that campaign got proved wrong, because they wanted 18 to 35-year-olds to reconsider the Nike brand and what it stood for. And my own anecdotal information, my daughters were not particular fans because of sourcing issues, labor issues, all sorts of things they grew up hearing about. They are in that demographic. And once that campaign hit, they were like, I'll totally think of Nike differently now.
Yeah. And I mean, Nike is a great example, I think, of a brand that understands its communities really well and can pick out the issues that will resonate with them and take action on them. But of course, even Nike, once these campaigns came out, certain skeletons in its own closet, right? One of the things I've observed, and not just me, I mean this is widely observed, is that when it comes to brands taking action on issues, they're far more likely to choose issues which are relatively uncontroversial, unlike Nike actually, for that matter, but often around sustainable development goals and so on, things that most people agree on. How hard is it to get brands to actually focus on issues like income inequality, tax avoidance, and maybe things like their contribution to the opioid crises?
Yeah, so probably pretty difficult because we don't see many examples, right? And I don't know that tax avoidance, I'm not certain which company is going to be right for that particular campaign.
I mean, there are some companies that actually I've noticed do now make a virtue of how much tax they're paying.
But that's probably not the mainstream consumer's sort of thinking and fixation. Yeah. I think some of the more challenging issues around income inequality, hunger, disease concerns, education issues that are real meaty, you do see companies beginning to engage there, where I think in the past they might have shied away.
And when it comes to actually addressing those issues, how do they do it? I mean, I'm just thinking of a company that maybe wants to start taking action but doesn't know where to begin. Now, obviously, they can talk to any number of the agencies in this room, but how important is it to bring in, I mean, is it NGOs that you're enlisting to help in this regard?
I think some of it is serendipity. I heard a story last week about a startup in New York called Crisis Text Hotline, which is focusing on a global basis around the very serious mental health issues that are happening around the world. And the founder of this NGO happened to be speaking about the development of the company and what they were trying to accomplish for young people. And Richard Branson was in the audience. And he came up to her afterward and said, "How do I help? How can we engage?" And the founder thought, "Oh, he must be interested in writing me a check," or something like that. And she came back and said to him after some consideration, she said, "I actually need to break through to the 4 big telecom companies in the US. Can you write a letter?"
Right.
And he wrote the 4 CEOs a letter, and they got free texting for this service for mental health crises in the US. And I think that was a level of engagement on part of a CEO in a company that was genuine, authentic, and in an area, mental health is just, I think, at the beginning of a space that companies are ready to sort of commit to.
So it requires an appetite for partnerships, you would say, and perhaps companies have to be comfortable with letting go of the kind of control maybe that they want to have over the narrative at all times?
Yes, and that's what makes, I think, a genuine and authentic effort and initiative. And I think that is what a brave organization and brave leadership does, to be challenged and pushed, perhaps, in some instances in areas where they may not be comfortable, but may result in higher employee trust, customer trust, and across the board, a better reputation with stakeholders.
Sure. I'm not sure how much time, maybe someone can tell me how much time.
12 seconds.
12 seconds, okay. So I'm going to ask
a quick question from the floor.
I'm going to ask you one quick last question. Obviously, this is an opportunity for agencies to counsel their clients in this regard. But when you're talking about helping companies and industries that are, let's say, distressed in terms of trust, those are the most difficult clients to take on, aren't they? Because you may face opposition from your own employees who don't want to work for those kinds of industries, right? I mean, we've just seen this in Hong Kong with a Hong Kong government brief to find a PR agency. Now, that is an institution that is crying out for good PR advice, but it can't find an agency willing to take it on because it's almost too toxic. How do you deal with that kind of a challenge?
As agencies, we all have our own sets of values and sense of purpose. I believe that folks should have the opportunity to have their day in court and have advocates on their behalf. But as an enterprise, we need to ensure that we can believe in the client's own story, and a genuine desire to either rectify what got them into the problem and move forward. And we've had numerous examples in our own past where we would take a challenging client on the presumption that they were serious about change and acknowledged what had gotten them into the place that they exist today. Absent that, we're not going to be in the position to move forward.
But certainly you're seeing employee activism as something, more of I'm not going to call it a challenge, but are you seeing that rising within your own ranks as well?
I think we need to ensure that our employees understand our own decision-making processes. We've been very clear about a number of industry categories, starting with tobacco, where we simply aren't going to engage. I also think there are always going to continue to be clients with whom we work that individuals may have a personal issue with the business or the area in which we're working, and we've always also had a long-standing policy that if something personally doesn't sit right for you, you don't have to work on that piece of business.
Okay, thank you. Do we have time for questions from the floor? Okay, thanks. Got time for one question.
Not even from the Edelman table?
They've heard it all before.
They've heard it all before.
Hi, I'm Krusha and I come from an employee advocacy platform. It's really heartening to hear you talk about advocacy and inclusivity. Can you hear me now?
Just about.
Yeah, now?
No, better.
Okay, perfect. So my question is about the social impact cause that you speak of, where organizations take it up. And it's more a two-part question. One is, since something you spoke of and also we hear a lot of, is that millennials are probably more drawn and impacted in terms of purchase by an organization compared to other demographics. So if I am an organization who is not catering to that target audience, of course, maybe a very small lot, but then does that mean that it's not essential for me to take up a social cause at, as much of it to build trust? And secondly, we spoke about CEOs' passions driving which cause an organization is taking up. So is it more an organization, should they choose their cause based on the CEO's passion, based on the company value, or based on what their demographic target audience is most driven by?
Great questions. I think the first one is, as it relates to millennials, a company should probably look within its own workforce as the first great sort of focus group around product development and engagement in societal issues, as where and how to engage. In terms of what issues to participate in, I think it can be both top-down and bottom-up. And there's some probably alchemy that needs to be done by an organization to figure out which makes most sense. Starbucks is a client with whom I've worked for years. Howard Schultz, as the real driver and founder of that business, drove a lot of engagement around community issues that he personally was passionate about, but they were just as quick to recognize when a store or a district or region began to do something that was really interesting. Education is a space that I'm thinking of in particular, that they thought could be scaled at a global level. And so Starbucks, I think, is a perfect company that has sort of struck the right balance between what's come from within and up and what has been driven from the CEO.
Thank you.
And just quickly, I mean, you mentioned companies for whom maybe their consumers are buying on price. And I think Unilever is a great example of that. You know, many of its products are in quite commoditized categories, and yet it's made it very clear that all of its brands have to be tackling social issues, and you see that with Lifebuoy and you know, many of the products actually in Asian and African markets and so on.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, thank you. Thank you very much, Matt. It's
Thank
been
you,
a real
Arun.
pleasure. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Matt. Thank you, Arun.
Pleasure as always.
Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.